At the Cusco airport, we bid farewell to our leader, Manuel. From Cusco, we catch a flight back to Lima, and then an international flight for Lima to Quito, Ecuador. After clearing customs, we meet up with our experienced leader for the next portion of our trip, Jimmy Pantino. Then it's a bus ride to our hotel, and we get settled in and have dinner together as a group that night. The next morning, we're joined by our local leader, Alfredo. Our first stop with Alfredo is the local market. And for us tourists, shopping in Ecuador is a little bit easier as the currency is US dollars. So some of the sights, sounds, and taste of this market.
This plant is chukirau, means dark to fire because of the color of the flower. But this one is really good for 3 months getting drink to get rid out of kidney stones. Like 3 months, no kidney stones at all. Wow. And I know that because I'm not just telling you, because I've tried with my dad a bunch of different things, including some prostate things, you know. So everything that you see here is good for something, plus alfalfa, which is good for our animals. And also we make drinks out of it. We make a juice and we mix it up with either naranjilla or blackberry. Super nice and super sweet. What else? You know, for instance, this one is good when people is having stomach problems that involves constipation, or when people have a lot of diarrhea, for instance. That regulates the whole metabolism of the stomach, right? And also at the same time here's the gastro problem, the ulcer and stuff.
Does he remind you of Kevin Newman?
The smile, yeah.
Esto se llama hornado. Hornado. All right. You got it.
Where's the head?
Actually, the head is the best.
Jimmy always had hand sanitizer at the ready for us.
Hand sanitizer, because we're just about trying this food of the Andean gods. Enjoy. Have a piece of it. You can actually taste also the skin. We call it cuero or chicharrón.
The market was a pretty interesting stop, and you could find just about anything in this market. It's pretty good size.
Show us your check. Hold one up. Okay.
Yeah, we're running.
For $1. Cinco. Yeah, like six.
After the market, our next stop is downtown Quito. So we're going to be doing a walking tour of the downtown area and the colonial nucleus of the capital city for Ecuador. And similarly to what we saw in Peru, there are a lot of immigrants from Venezuela in Ecuador. And just like in Peru, with no welfare system, the immigrants to Ecuador take to working on the streets to try to earn a living. Our walk takes us to Independence Plaza, which features a winged statue that represents freedom. For Sunday morning, the plaza seemed quite busy. The plaza is also where you'll find the presidential palace, so we got to see it only from the outside. And there are the stalwart guards in their traditional uniforms keeping watch. So we continue our walk around downtown Quito and start working our way across the city in a little bit different direction. And just like our time in Peru, we're introduced to some of the cultures of this part of the world, and we see the good, the bad, and the ugly. Next up, Alfredo has us stop and talk with a sex worker about the legal sex trade in Ecuador. Next, we're off to stroll the narrow lanes of the La Ronda, where there's a lot of traditional shops and local artists. One of our stops was in a little business where they make chocolate products, and while we were in there, they gave us a tour and showed us how that they make their chocolates.
Cacao, the color yellow, is the Nacional Arriba, is endemic, is produced in Ecuador 5,000 years ago. The other type, this is CCN51. This is hybrid, is more productive, more resistant.
That was an interesting and tasty little stop. So we're on the bus and we're going off for lunch. We're in a restaurant high up on a hill, had a great meal with a wonderful view, looking over the city, and we can see an active volcano off in the distance. So that finishes the active part of our day, and we're on our own for the rest of the evening. The next morning, day 2 of our time in Quito, our first stop is the Cinemu Disabled Children's Orchestra on the other side of town. At the school, they use various visual arts to teach the disabled children and young adults motor skills and to build up their confidence for normal life. And this morning, the students put on a full production for us. And for the grand finale, they recruited members of the audience for the production. For our next stop, we're visiting the Intinan Museum. The museum is a park of sorts, and you get to stand and straddle the equator. So it's kind of interesting. It's a very interesting museum. They had a lot of artifacts, a lot of Amazonian artifacts, including musical instruments. And with Jimmy on percussion, we get a little sampling of one of the instruments.
They use some parts of animals which they can get the power, like the most powerful, like eagles or jaguars. Okay, so this is part of culture. This talks about hierarchy. This talks about they wear only some specific people wear some of these crowns on wear in special days. Well, I'm afraid that time is over. I hope you enjoy.
So to cap off our visit, we had a wonderful lunch at the museum. In the afternoon, we had some free time, so a group of us rented 2 cars and went over to tour the botanical gardens in Quito. So let me take you on a little trip through the gardens. So that's it for Quito. Tomorrow it's the Galapagos. The Galapagos Islands sit some 600 miles off the coast of Ecuador. For our journey to the Galapagos, we had a direct flight from Quito to the island of Baltra. The Galapagos Islands are a national park of Ecuador, and they are tightly controlled and managed. Before boarding a flight to the Galapagos, one has to go through an extra set of screening, and they're looking for fruits and vegetables and plants that they would not want to have introduced to the islands. Once we landed on Baltra, we were screened once again, and including our checked luggage. It was pretty cool the way they do our checked luggage. That bag's going to be pulled for inspection. From the airport, everyone boards a bus that shuttles us down to the ferry terminal. Then we all board the ferry and take the short ride across the channel to Santa Cruz Island. This was the view out of the bus window as we descended the hill down to the ferry dock. Not exactly a Mackinac Island ferry, but it got us across the channel. And now a couple of shots from our brief ride on the ferry across the Itabaca Channel. Once we're safely on Santa Cruz Island, our trip leader and now our Galapagos naturalist, Jimmy Pantino, has a bus waiting there for us. And we're about to begin the next part of our adventure. So we're all aboard our private motor coach and we are motoring our way across Santa Cruz Island. But first, halfway across the island, we make our first stop. Our first stop is an ecological reserve that is home to lots and lots of giant tortoise. Jimmy, our naturalist, refers to it as Jurassic Park. The first order of business is for all of us to get suited up with a pair of rubber boots for the wet terrain. And here Gloria is making her Galapagos fashion statement. We didn't go 10 yards before we saw our first giant tortoise, and this was one big giant tortoise. Just a little bit further along in our walk, we came upon another giant tortoise. And Jimmy had this one posing for us. He had him lifting his head so that we could get some nice clear shots.
Are they individual?
Are they like whales?
Oh yes, yeah, like our finger.
Yeah, like our fingerprints.
Yes, they are different. Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
Jimmy? Oh, no, keep talking.
Yeah,
Another feature in this reserve are lava tunnels. These tunnels are actually formed by lava flows years ago. You can get a look at what the reserve looks like when you're not looking at a turtle.
I really like it. I really love it. Okay, so this is 3:05. I want to really apologize. It's not my idea of rushing you.
No.
But
I understand.
but I think if the plane was late, that's not our, nothing to do
No,
with that.
no.
So I want to go and show you also Darwin Center.
Yes,
So
yes.
this is 3:05. We have 10 minutes that you can do.
Go.
10 minutes for.
So as you heard, we had 10 minutes on our own to do a little exploring before we had to board the bus and move on. As we were getting ready to board the bus, I spotted one more turtle to go and shoot a little video of as he bulldozed his way through the woods. So on the bus on our way out of the park, we spotted these turtles out in the field, and these two were getting it on right outside the bus. So we continued to motor our way across the island, headed for the Darwin Center. The Darwin Center is the home base for scientists to do research on the animals and marine life of the Galapagos Islands, and also to help advise the management actions of the Galapagos National Park. The Darwin Center is located on the east end of Port Ayora. So after our tour of the center, we walked across the waterfront area of town to the point where we're going to meet the crew to take us out to the boat. Our walk across the waterfront area of town had a few interesting sights, including this add-on second seat for these bikes. Our limo awaits. We'll be taking this dinghy out to our ship. The Carina was docked out in the bay, just a short ride out. The sun was just setting as we rode out to the Carina. In this shot, you can see the members of our group that rode the first dinghy out, and they're getting their life jackets off and getting on board. So our accommodations for the next 4 nights is the Carina. The Carina is a 100-foot double steel hull yacht that can accommodate 16 passengers and a crew of 10. We had tables set up for dining on the starboard side and the port side in the main cabin area. Also in the main cabin area was a lounge area that had seating on both the starboard and port side as well. So as part of our settling in process, we met the crew and had some briefings about what to expect and all that. Each cabin had its own climate control and a separate bath and shower for each cabin. So once we're all on board, we've been introduced to the crew, we've had our briefings, we had a really nice dinner, and then everyone went back and got settled into their cabins for our overnight voyage. So tonight, while we sleep, the cruise sails from Santa Cruz Island to the southern end of Isabella Island. Once we left the protection of the bay off of Porto Ayora, the seas got a little bit rough overnight. So shortly before daybreak, we reached the protected bay off of this little city of Porto Villamil. Right around sunup, we had just enough time for a cup of coffee and a light snack before we were scheduled to get into the dinghy for our first shore landing. For our first landing, we were headed for the rugged little island of Tintorres. As we approached our landing spot, we could see we were being greeted by a lot of marine iguanas and Sally Lightfoot crabs. The Sally Lightfoot crabs were prolific, and they were all over the island. And there was no shortage of marine iguanas either. The island was mostly volcanic rock, like you see in this picture. There was some vegetation along a canal that ran across the island, and it was there that we saw our first male frigate bird. And it was in that canal where we spied this turtle swimming through. If they aren't side by side, it's difficult for a novice like me to tell a sea lion from a fur seal, but I think we're looking at sea lions here. And as you might expect, there are fishermen on these islands. And despite the sparse vegetation, we did see a bird every once in a while. So we're all starting to get hungry, so it's time to get back to the boat to have breakfast. So after breakfast, the group had an option. We could stay on the boat and relax, or they would take us in with a dinghy into Puerto Villamil, and there was a lagoon there that you could snorkel, or you could just go along in the dinghies and wander the beach area on your own. So that's what Gloria and I chose to do. We went in with the snorkelers and walked around the beach area, and there was a little birding trail that we could go on. So here are the images that I captured while we were walking around in that area. So in the afternoon, we're ready for our third landing, and we're back into Puerto Villamil, and this time there's a bus waiting for us, and we go up to another turtle breeding center that is on Isabela Island. For the return trip, we walked on a path and boardwalks through a wetland area down to the beach where we stopped at a tiki bar and had some refreshment before we got on the dinghies to go back to the boat. So without further ado, here are the images that I captured on this little adventure. On the way back to the Carina, while we were in the dinghies, Jimmy spotted some Galapagos penguins for us to admire. They are the northernmost breeding penguins in the world, and the only ones found at the equator. So after a fabulous dinner, we all get tucked in, the captain gives the order, and we travel overnight from Isabela Island to Santiago Island. We awoke to another beautiful day in paradise. Same drill, up early, grab a quick cup of coffee and a pastry, and then we're going ashore. So, let me show you some of my favorite images from this trip ashore. Well, that's how Gloria and I like to start our days. So we're headed back out to the boat and we're going to grab some breakfast.
Gente, come a little closer. Be careful.
So after our breakfast, we moved a short ways. We went to a bay where Jimmy thought we might be able to do some snorkeling. So some of us went snorkeling, and you also had the option to stay back on the boat where they could do some crafts and stuff like that. One of our passengers hit their head on the ladder getting back into the dinghy after snorkeling. So the captain found a ship with a doctor on it, National Geographic Islander. So we went over there to let him get checked out. It was all good, no stitches needed. So we're going to have a dinner and tuck in for the night to get ready for another day. So we're on the move again from the northwest corner of Santiago Island to Rabada Island. Dawn broke to another glorious day. And for us, it's the same drill. Up early, grab a coffee, a pastry, into the pangas for our first shore landing for the day. For this landing, it's going to be a wet landing, and we're in an area called Red Beach. You can see why it got the name Red Beach. So here are some of my favorite images from this landing. We're on our way back to the boat. We're going to get some breakfast. When we get to our rooms, we find that they had a little surprise there for us. So after breakfast, we're going back to Red Beach. And we had a choice of either hiking the beach by ourselves, or Jimmy was going to take the rest of us snorkeling. So Gloria and I hiked the beach. After lunch, the boat's on the move again. Our final destination this afternoon is going to be North Seymour Island. But along the way, the captain took us close to shore so we could get a little scenery and see some wildlife while we were traveling to North Seymour Island. Several times while we were out in the open water, frigate birds would be following our ship, and up on the upper deck would be a good spot to get some pictures of them. While we're underway, the captain gave us a tour of the bridge, and a few people had a little turn at the wheel. And now a few of the images I captured on our way to North Seymour Island. Our landing on North Seymour Island was going to be a dry landing, but the high waves and winds made it kind of tricky. The idea was to get out of the boat quickly and then up the bank to get out of the way for the next person. All the while the crew was holding the boat against our rock landing pad. As we got further into our hike, we found out that frigate birds were nesting here also, and some of them had their chicks, as you can see in these few pictures right here. And then as we got a little further in, we actually found that the blue-footed boobies nest on the ground, and we did find a couple of those with eggs, and then we actually found one with a chick. That evening, which would be our last night on the boat, the crew got together and put together a special dinner for us, sort of a farewell dinner. So I'd like to thank the crew for just wonderful, wonderful service, and couldn't have asked for a better trip. The crew was fabulous, and we also have a big thank you for Jimmy for getting us into all this magnificent wildlife. Again, it was a fabulous, fabulous trip. So as the sun sets that night, the sun is setting on our trip. So the next morning, after breakfast, we're shuttled to shore, and the bus is there waiting for us to take us to the airport.